left it down here. But we are in Daniel 3. The reason we didn't read the sermon text is because it's the whole chapter, taking a whole narrative from beginning to end and going to get the point of the narrative. What do you think is the number one, if you had to guess, mental illness that people have to deal with? Let's just say here in America, probably the world too, but I looked up America. Yeah, I saw kind of a tie between depression and anxiety, actually. So they both kind of came together. They were both the number one issue that's being dealt with. It's either anxiety or it's either depression. Now, what is anxiety? Because I really want to focus on kind of that this morning. What do you think anxiety is? Yeah, we're excessively worrying. What are we worrying about? Something that's going to happen in the future that we don't know what exactly is going to happen in this situation. Some of them can be very real. Some of them can be some people can be I can't, I don't see money coming in. I see prices on certain things going up. I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills in the coming month. I don't know how I'm going to feed my kids. I don't know what's going to happen. Some of those can be very real concerns. Some of people that may not have to worry about stuff like that might worry about things, bigger picture stuff like World War III or something like that, constantly just in the news and seeing all the things that could happen, that might happen. There might be World War III. This might happen. And it just plays on our mind, and these slowly just get into our subconscious, and we worry and we panic. Now, do you think people can have anxiety over things that are imaginary, that won't happen? What's an example of that, do you think? That's a real thing that's going to happen. He said aliens will abduct us. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I didn't go that far. Yeah. Anyway, so no, yes, fake things can happen. Everybody in here knows that the way to get a real diagnosis, one that's always true and legitimate, is to take whatever's happening to you and to go to Google and type it in. And that will be a very true diagnosis. Actually, the reason why Google is actually the worst is because it'll tell you the worst possible scenario for whatever is happening. Man, my finger is when I bend it, it feels like it hurts. And I type it into Google. Oh, you might have brain cancer. Oh, wow. Okay. That's how Google works. I promise you, whatever's there, it'll show you the worst possible thing. Go to the doctor. You might have this. And so obviously, there are things that can happen, whether real or imaginary, that we will be anxious about. We will be worried about the future. And ultimately, what anxiety stems from, it's connected to, we think that things are out of control. We think that that things are not in control, we're definitely not in control of them. And if we're not, we start looking up. Maybe a doctor's in control. Oh, the doctor's not in control. Then we got to look up higher. Is anybody else in control? And if we do think someone's in control and we're anxious, it's often that we think somebody devious or don't have our best intentions in mind are the ones that are in control. And so often, control, sovereignty, and anxiety, they just go together. I even saw this recently in a movie. I'm just thinking of this on the fly because I just thought of it. But I recently saw a movie, and it was just talking about how it says some people worry about things that are happening in the world because they think that there are a bunch of sinister people behind the scenes controlling everything. He says, but the really scary thing is actually nobody's in control. The real scary thing is actually no one's in control. So either way, whether you think someone's in control or not, control and anxiety go together. I'm just trying to make that connection. And so do you think that everything is out of control? Whenever we're suffering, whenever you're struggling to pay a bill, whenever you get a bad diagnosis from Google, is there somebody sovereign over that suffering? And so this morning, what we're going to do is, often we have some more complex sermons. Today, kind of more simple sermon. We're going into Daniel 3. We're just looking at a simple narrative, and because I just want to present some very simple beliefs. But what I want to do is, with this sermon series, just begin it off with what's called a Christophany, and we're going to be seeing glimpses of Jesus. Glimpses of Jesus. There's a movie that I cannot endorse, but I will tell you what happens in it. Before the main character comes on the scene, or one of the main characters, whenever he comes onto the scene 30 or 40 minutes later, he's like in every scene after that. But before he comes on the scene, there are glimpses. He appears on the screen, flashes, or there's hints or foreshadows of him, probably about 20 times before he comes on. Now, Jesus is going to come on the scene most prominent and most clearly in the New Testament. But throughout the Old Testament, we see glimpses of him in many different places. We see him in Ezekiel 1, he's on the throne. I think Isaiah 6 is him, he's on the throne. We see him in many different ways, and I believe we also see him this morning. He's flashing upon the screen in the Old Testament before he takes center stage in the New. And right now, I wanted to give you guys the bad news that you guys get to stay today, so that's I'm loving that I get to tell you that this morning. But no, they're not doing, there's no children's church or children's Sunday school this morning, so you get to stay with me. Sorry for that. So, what's the context? We're in Babylon, right? Why are we in Babylon? Why is Israel in Babylon right now? Yeah, there's disobedience. We must remember that Israel is in a covenant relationship with God. He begins his plan to get the world back on track to save the world. He goes to Abraham. He makes a covenant with Abraham, and he says, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. He plans on saving the entire world through Abraham and through his descendants. And so when his descendants come, they are supposed to obey God, be a blessing, be a light to the nations, and all the nations would be attracted to Yahweh. If they obey, they'll be a light. God will lift them up, and all the nations will be attracted to them. Did this happen? No. Deuteronomy 28-30 outlines the blessings and curses of the covenant. These aren't just words. They mean something. Like, if you obey, this will happen. And you're supposed to read the rest of the Old Testament. Did they obey? This would happen. Did they disobey? If they don't, this will happen. It actually means something. It's not just something to pass over and just keep on reading. When it has these blessings and curses, he is saying we are going into a marriage, a covenant relationship. If you guys don't do this, this is what's going to happen. The major curse of Deuteronomy 28 is that they will be exiled. They will be kicked out of the land, and another nation will rule over them. That's exactly what happened. Jeremiah says, couldn't be clearer that because they broke the covenant, they will go into another land. They will go to Babylon. Isaiah prophesied that they're going to go into Babylon. Well, in Daniel, they are actually in Babylon. Now, they are under the covenant curses. Daniel 9 makes it very clear, the covenant curses have come upon us. So they are under the covenant curses. And so one of the things they have to deal with whenever they are in Babylon is there is this belief that, I think of these other nations, there are these sort of demonic sort of gods, so to speak, that are over them. And the belief is if one nation conquers another nation, that means that the God of that nation is stronger than your nation. So you take Babylon, for instance. They not only conquered Israel, they conquered the world. And so now Israel has to deal with, well, are the gods of Babylon stronger than Yahweh? And this is something that Daniel will try. He is answering, and it's being answered many different ways in the book of Daniel. Isaiah actually picked this up in chapter 40-55 in Isaiah, I think, is like the gospel before the gospel comes. But a couple of the chapters, he's dealing with how God is, even though they're going into Babylon, God is still stronger than all these other gods. Can this God do this? Can this God do that? No, Yahweh is still stronger. And this is one thing the text is trying to show us this morning, that God is still sovereign even in the midst of this nation. Even though Nebuchadnezzar thinks that he's sovereign, and we'll see that in a second, God, Yahweh, the God of Israel, is still sovereign. So the first question I have is, and it's really just to get you to think in this direction of, is there any way that the world wants you to compromise on your Christian beliefs? Is there anything it's pushing you towards that makes you want to compromise things that you believe about the gospel, things that you believe about Jesus? So as we come into our text, we're approached and we see Nebuchadnezzar. You guys have heard of Nebuchadnezzar before, right? King of Babylon. There's debate on what's happening the first several chapters of Daniel, and some people think that it's Nebuchadnezzar's conversion. He eventually gets humbled, and it seems like at the end he believes that Yahweh is the God of all. But right here where we're at in our text, this is not the case. Nebuchadnezzar is a king. He's very arrogant, and I'm going to show you in a moment. I'll actually say this statement, but I'll show you in the text here in a moment. But he says this statement, "Who is the God that can deliver you from my hand?" This is what he's going to tell Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Who is the God that can deliver you from my hand? Imagine such an arrogant statement, that he thinks that he is God over everything. And why would he think such a thing? But where we have come at in our text, what he has done is he has made this, I say beautiful, you got to know I'm being sarcastic, but this beautiful golden statue, this massive golden statue, this image of this sort of God that he wants everybody in Babylon to bow down and worship. He wants everyone to bow down and worship this statue. We'll look at it, I'll read verses 1 to 5. I don't know if I can read everything because it'll be so long, but we'll read verses 1 to 5. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose weight was 60 cubits and his breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura and in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors and the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." So basically, he's got this image, he's set up, he wants everybody in Babylon, when the music plays, fall down on your face, worship this image. It's going to happen. He's got all the elite to come do it, he's got everybody involved, he's made sure all the other governors and everybody is okay with this. They're going to be okay with it, but he's making sure that they're all on board. Everybody's going to do it from the greatest to the least. Everybody has to fall down and worship. And guess what the consequences are if you don't fall down and worship this statue? Verse 6. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. It's probably something like the worst suffering imaginable. No big deal. Just get thrown into a fiery furnace, burned alive. Pretty horrific stuff. Pretty horrible stuff. And so these are the consequences. Can you imagine being placed in such a situation where your faith is something you truly believe, and you are being told that if you don't do something that goes against your beliefs, you're going to have unimaginable suffering? Well, this is a situation with many of them. I want to ask, do you think that the Israelites would have had a problem with worshiping this golden statue? No, right? Yeah, I think that's right. For the most part, most of them wouldn't. You think all the way back even when God is with them after saving them from the Exodus, soon after, just days after, they're at the base of the mountain worshiping a golden calf. And then these same people, as you go on, when they go into Babylon, the main reason that they go for breaking this covenant is because of idolatry. They don't have a problem with worshiping other gods, especially when they're going to be threatened with death. And so falling down, doing this is no big deal. But there were some faithful people there. There were faithful remnants. within Israel that were under these covenant curses as well, because this is a corporate punishment, and so they're in Babylon as well. And three of them would have been Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, they're part of the faithful remnant, and they trust in Yahweh. And to make matters worse, they actually had high positions within Babylon. See, the way it worked is, even though they are in exile, the king would still pick people that he thought were, trustworthy, but were capable of accomplishing certain tasks, and he would put them in charge over certain things. So he actually picked many of the Israelites and placed them in prominent positions, and these three actually had some prominent positions. In verse 12, it says that they oversaw the affairs of the province of Babylon. Probably had some kind of like administrative sort of task with overseeing the affairs in Babylon. So what we're seeing now is there are opposing desires, right? We go to the New Testament, James says that the reason for all conflict, the reason for all wars, the reason why you and your wife might get into some conflict with each other is that there are opposing desires within you. You have a desire, somebody else has a desire, and it creates conflict. And what's happening here is that the king has a desire. I want everybody to worship this statue. I want everybody to worship this God. These three men, I don't want to worship this statue. And so, what's going to happen? And if you look at just the circumstances of everything, you take faith out of the picture, who's the one that has all the power that you can see? Nebuchadnezzar. So it doesn't look good for these three men. And so what happens is, the music starts playing, right? I've been in Iraq, and has anybody ever been to the Middle East, like a country like this? Yeah, have you ever been into the situation where they're playing the music, and then so this happens in the Middle East. They'll in Iraq especially, where I've been to Kuwait and Iraq. I've noticed in Iraq more so, but music would play whatever city I was in, wherever I was at, and whenever that played, all the Iraqis, they would fall down and they would worship and pray. Whenever the music played. Similarly, whenever music was playing in Babylon, this was this ceremony. It just let everybody know everybody's got to fall down and worship. So this is what happens. The music starts playing. Dun, 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 everybody falls down, except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're not falling down. So every day, they're just ignoring it, and they're just doing it and just hoping no one notices. But eventually, some people do notice what's happening. This is the Chaldeans. And so, look at verse 12. They go tell Nebuchadnezzar. And they go to Nebuchadnezzar and they say, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So how do you think Nebuchadnezzar is going to react to this? Well, it's going to say eventually he's going to get into a fury. But what he's going to do is he's going to interrogate them and threaten them. Verse 13 says he commands them to be brought before him. And at the end of 15, he threatens to throw them in the fiery furnace. I'm going to read 15 because it's such an arrogant statement that's thrown in here too. Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. There's the threat. You don't do it, you're going to be thrown into this furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? That's the statement that is wanting us to really focus on. Who is the God that can deliver them out of their hands? And you have to think, how do they get in Babylon? Israel's conquered. Is Yahweh greater than Nebuchadnezzar? I keep thinking of illustrations on the fly. When I think about arrogance, okay, when you think about like an athlete or an actor, I'm so amazed by this statement. So like whenever they get some kind of award or some kind of lifetime achievement, or they get something that hardly anybody else has accomplished, when some athlete breaks some record that nobody else has broken and they get celebrated for it, and there's some time where they're awarded and they get some award, what's the thing they always say? This is so, we don't know, so humbling. This is such a humbling experience. And I'm like, no, it's not. It is the exact opposite of humbling. If you are accomplishing something that no one else has accomplished, you have to fight to not be arrogant, to not become more corrupted from that. And Nebuchadnezzar has accomplished things at this time that nobody else has accomplished. He is, in one sense, king of the world. So there's going to be 4 beastly kingdoms, and the beast at that time is essentially the king of the world. Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, then the Persians are going to be the kings, then the Greeks, then the Romans. But right now it's Babylon. This is their time. They've conquered most of their little known world that they know at this time. And so Nebuchadnezzar thinks nobody can beat him, no one can defeat him, especially not this little nation of Israel and this God that they're believing in. I'm going to throw them in the furnace, and nothing's going to happen to me. No one can defy me. He's wanting them just bow down to my will. What I say goes. And not that I think that this is happening or going to happen, but just wanting to help you kind of feel the situation that they're in. Just imagine some horrible dystopian future where, let's just say Muslims have conquered the earth. There is no Christianity anymore. Anybody that names the name of Jesus Christ will be taken out, and they will be publicly executed in a horrific way, a painful way. And so the entire world knows you don't say Jesus' name, you don't worship Jesus, you must bow down and worship Allah. Are you going to do it? There's some hesitation on that one. I hope not, but I don't know what that is. The light is flashing over there. But yeah, like I said, sometimes I feel like a cat up here when I just jump on the light. But what would you do if you were in that situation? It would be difficult. And so quickly, I want to see 4 things that we see that these 3 men, what kind of faith they have whenever they're being faced with this kind of persecution. We see 4 things. First, we see that they affirm they have faith in their God. So they affirm faith in their God. Verse 17, if this be so, our God, whom we serve, so that they're making a point that there's a God that we serve. This is our God. They are identifying with Yahweh. They are not identifying with the idol. They're not identifying with the golden statue, the golden image, even when being persecuted. As a matter of fact, they'll go on. The next point is that they refuse the idolatry. Verse 18, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, or worship the golden image. So we have our God that we serve. We won't serve your God. So they affirm their God. They refuse idolatry. But then even in this situation where Nebuchadnezzar seems like he can do anything that he wants to them, they demonstrate faith by believing that God has sovereignty even over this situation. Look at verse 17 again. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us out of your hand, O king. So Nebuchadnezzar's question, who can deliver you out of my hands? Their answer is, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us out of your hands. So they are believing in the sovereignty of Yahweh. They are believing that God can get them out of this situation. You're not sovereign over our lives. You may have an army at your command, but God is ultimately sovereign over every breath you take, every thought you think, everything that you do. He's even going to be sovereign over these flames. Then the 4th thing, and this is, I think, the thing, out of the first 3 things, I think that we do well with those. We affirm God. We don't turn to idols in certain situations when we suffer. We can be tempted with that. And we also can say, and if I'm in a certain situation, God can heal me. I think this is a certain kind of faith that comes next that I wish we had in our vocabulary more often. Let's back up to the very end of verse 17. He will deliver us out of your hand, O king. And then these 3 words. But if not? But if not? This is saying that God is sovereign. He can deliver us out of your hands. But even if he doesn't, I'm still trusting in his good character. I'm still trusting that he is making a sovereign decision, and I'm going to trust his wise counsel. God is God, and I will trust him. This is saying that even if God has decided that we will go through suffering, we are still going to trust him in that suffering. This is the kind of faith that I wish we have, because we often, like I said, have faith that God will deliver us, and we say, I believe God's going to heal me, I believe he's going to do this, and we want to have that, we want to believe that, but we also want to say, if not, if he doesn't, I still love him. If he doesn't, I will still trust him. You can imagine even just with little, maybe even things we might consider smaller with, Christmas coming up, someone's like, man, I'm struggling paying my bills, I don't know how I'm going to get food on the table. And then my kids, they go out and they hear these other kids talk about all these Christmas presents that these other kids are getting. And I know that God could help me pay my bills. And I know that God could even go extra and help me get a present or something for my kid. But imagine if we said, but if not, but even if he doesn't, I'm going to still love him. But even if he doesn't, I'm still going to teach my kids that he's greater than any present that they could have on Christmas, that he's greater than this. Imagine if we went through some kind of sickness or illness. Google has given us a bad prognosis. We got 3 months to live, according to Google. And we don't know what to do. And imagine you really, not just Google, but you really do got 3 months to live. And you say, I believe God can do a miracle. Okay, that's faith. You are having faith that God can do a miracle. But is it in you? Is it in your faith? Do you have that quality, that character to say, even if he doesn't heal me, I am fine with it? He has promised that if I die, it'll be the greatest thing that ever happens to me. Do you have that kind of faith? That's what they're exercising here. But if not, I had a friend, he's a pastor. We went to seminary together, and while we were going to seminary together, we were in each other's small groups for about 5 years. He ended up going to become a pastor in Indiana. Obviously, I came to Pennsylvania, went to Milford first. A couple of years ago, they had a child, a girl. Well, at this time, she was 2 years old. They went on vacation, and while on vacation, they came and they couldn't find their daughter anywhere in the house. They start looking all over the house. Then they go to the back door, and they notice that the back door is opened up and unlocked. So they start going out and they start looking for her, and they know that there is a pond in the backyard. They go to the pond, and they found that the little 2-year-old girl has drowned in the pond, and she's dead. And I don't know why sometimes the great shepherd will lead us into some of the darkest valleys. But sometimes he does, and it's his own. And I'm not trying to make light of the situation. I can't imagine if something like that would happen to me. I don't know how I would take it. But I did see his faith during this time. And it was amazing to me. And it was a great example to me. But I do know that the great shepherd does lead us sometimes into the deepest and darkest valleys. And the question is, what are we going to do when he does? And as we see here, Nebuchadnezzar does throw them in the fiery furnace. So what is this suffering like? Look at verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he ordered that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter, more than it was usually heated. 7 times hotter. So already this is enough to be unimaginable suffering. You get thrown in, you die. He made this 7 times hotter than it should be. Such resistance. He has such arrogance, he's lifted himself up so high that he cannot believe anybody would resist him. And because some people do resist him and will not bow down and do what he says, he wants their suffering to be unimaginable. Make this 7 times hotter than it should be. And it's so hot that it's actually going to kill the people who went to put them inside the fire. That's how hot it is. And for some of you, and I've talked to some of you and many of you, some of you have been to so many funerals this year that it's hard to even keep count of how many people you've lost. For many of you, you're suffering in such great ways that you don't even want it to be made public. Maybe you've told me personally, and I know how you're suffering. For you, right now, the flames can feel 7 times hotter than they should be. So what are you going to do whenever you're suffering in this way? If you heard my voice cry, I don't cry. It never happened in my life before. I'm not crying. You're crying. But no, so what are you going to do, though, when these situations come? Some people, like I said, have been to many funerals. Some people have a horrible prognosis right now, and they are suffering in very difficult ways. What can you do? There's different situations, there's different solutions that the world can give us. Some of us, and I'm not saying that there's not a place for all of these, but we can make them an idol. They can be our golden statue to get us out of the suffering if it completely just takes over our faith. But we can be numb. We can just go on this thing like, just give me some codeine, give me some drugs, give me something to just numb this pain so I don't have to think about what I'm going through anymore, and I'm just going to sort of just live my life just numb to everything, numb to everyone, numb to reality. Or we can escape. Maybe I can't get access to narcotics, but what am I going to do? I'm not going to go pray. I'm not going to go talk to God. I'm not going to face reality. I'm going to get on TV. I'm going to get on the internet and just have endless amounts of entertainment. Just pass the time and just not deal with it. Just escape. Just get me out of reality. Or there are some that press into the anxiety. More information. That's what I need. Let me turn on the news. I just need to hear something, just hear some more information. Maybe that'll change things. Maybe if I look up this on, maybe look up Google this way, it'll give me a different diagnosis. I don't know what's going on. But either way, there is different things that the world can give us. And whenever we turn to these other things, like for instance, we turn to just escaping completely. And like I say, I'm not saying that you should cut off internet and TV the whole time you're suffering with something. That's not what I'm saying. But if it is coming to the point where you're not having faith, where you're not trusting in God, you're not praying, you're not seeing this happen, maybe there is an idol in your life and you are just escaping. And whenever we're doing that, it would be like having this big shotgun wound over us. And when we escape, we're just putting a little Band-Aid over it here, like, here we go. When there's a surgeon right next to us. God knows exactly what we need, and knowing that God is sovereign, knowing that God is in control is exactly what we need to get through any circumstance, any difficulty. This is exactly what got them through their circumstance. They realized He's sovereign, and even if He is sovereignly wanting me to suffer, I'll still be okay, because God's in control no matter what. And so there's all these things the world offer us. And I don't know exactly what you may be going through, but I do know one thing that always happens through suffering. You know, when things are easy, we can become like, just some spoiled children that we getting everything we want. Everything is just so easy that we become intolerant of even the slightest inconvenience. But when things are hard, it's not like that. When things are difficult, it's not like that. I heard, I was reading a pastor on this text centuries ago, like hundreds of years ago, and he was comparing it to a metal worker or like somebody who's making a sword. He's like, when a metal worker, he takes a piece of metal, what does he do? He puts it in the flames and he makes it pliable, he makes it malleable, and it can fit, he can shape it into whatever he wants, and he takes the hammer and he just pounds it, and he pounds it, and he pounds it, and he turns it into something useful. Something that was just a piece of metal, he molds into something useful. In the same way, pressure can make diamonds. God takes us and we are unuseful, so to speak. We are, in a sense, whatever we are right now, we could be more useful than what we are. And ease will not make us better. Ease will not make us more like Christ. But what he does is he sticks us in the flames. He sticks us in the furnace of affliction. And yes, sometimes the flames are 7 times hotter than they should be. But the flames are what make us malleable. And God is sovereign. He's the one that controls the hammer of life. And he lets it pound us and pound us and pound us until it makes us into more like Christ. And it transforms us. That's his goal with it. I know that happens in every situation for the child of God. What's the greatest promise for those who are suffering persecution? Look at verses 24 to 25. Then King, is that coming up? Yeah. No, it's not coming up. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king," he answered and said, "but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Astonished. This man thinks he controls everything, thinks he's king of the world, and in one sense he is. Throws them in the fire, thinks that they're going to suffer his wrath. While his men that throw them in the fire are killed, the 3 men are in the fire. They are unbound, walking around in the fire, unhurt, unharmed, not a hair on their heads touched. And there's a 4th one in the fire with them. And it even says, it goes on to say, I love that it says, like a son of the gods. Like a son of the gods. I agree with, I think most theologians on this text that this is a Christophany. It's a image of the pre-incarnate Christ. We see, like I said, glimpses of Christ. When it talks about saying angel of the Lord, don't let that throw you off. It often refers to Jesus as angel of the Lord. Angel it means messenger in its most literal meaning, the messenger of the Lord. But I do think that this is the pre-incarnate Christ. Even if you don't think that it is, either way, God is sending his presence is being with these people in the midst of the flames while they're going through this, that he is present with them in their suffering, whether through a mediator or whether he himself is there. As I said, I do think it is God himself that is there. So imagine, and you can imagine just the way life is, like we are tossed day to day by our emotions. Whenever we know that some suffering is coming up, sometimes reality can hit harder than other times. Sometimes we can be okay with it, and some other times it can just really hit us, and we're like, man, really anxious and things like that. I imagine, as I've read one theologian before, that grace comes like right at the moment that we need it. Like the greatest grace comes right at the moment that we need it the most. And I imagine that because of the faith they had, first off, God wants to show off. People that have trust in him, people that are like, man, my God is sovereign over these flames even. God wants to show up for them. God wants to give them peace even in this. And he wants to reward them for their faith. And for people that are saying that he's sovereign over the flames, there may have been some stress, some anxiety before they went in, but imagine the peace and comfort they were feeling while they're in it. And they know that the presence of this messenger of God is with them. And that is the greatest promise that we have from God whenever we're suffering. It's not that God will take us out of our suffering, but that God will be with us in our suffering. It's not that God will take us out of our suffering, but no matter what we are suffering, Jesus Christ will be with us in our suffering. And if you think about it, no matter what you are suffering, you can think about it as an opportunity to show the world that you're unlike the world. You have an opportunity to show the world that your God gives you a peace, knowing that He is sovereign over this situation, a peace that they don't have. Who can have joy in cancer? Unbelievers, some can, but there is a greater peace and joy that Jesus and God will give to His people that the world cannot have. It's a peace that knows that God is in control and that even if I die, everything is taken care of. That's a peace that the world can't give. That's something the world can never give you. And people look to certain things that have happened in history. People look to certain things. How can God allow that happen to that 2-year-old? Or how can God allow what has happened to in Nazi Germany or this and that? But when we look at, and I don't know, I don't have an answer for why God allows certain things to happen, why He allows certain evils to happen, and why darkness happens in certain situations. I do know in Isaiah that it says that I don't understand everything, and that as high as the heavens are above the earth, my thoughts are not His thoughts, and my ways are not His ways. And maybe He knows some things that we don't know. But what I do know is another thing that I wouldn't do, and another thing that I don't know, is why He would send His Son to die on the cross in our place and take on the greatest suffering. And I think in all of this, it proves that even in the midst of all of our suffering, we know that Jesus Christ is willing and ready to take on the greatest of all of our sufferings on Himself. That is the God we serve. And so He came to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they needed it most. And we can know this Christmas that whether it's, something as simple as finances or another death of a loved one or whatever, we know that God is promising that He will be with us through this and that He is sovereign over every situation. Let's pray. Father, as we are about to take communion, I do just